Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music. And in this video, I'm going to talk about a UK band called Headstone. And they're definitely under the radar for a lot of people. I remember picking up both the albums in the used record stores. I never really saw them in cutouts, although I'm sure that's where they ended up at some point. But I ended up picking up both their records just in used record stores. Had no idea who they were, and later on I checked their pedigree, and they've got a really cool pedigree and a really interesting sound. And there's a lot of UK British bands around that time period, 74, 75, that were getting a little funkier. Songs were getting shorter, a lot less jamming, kind of getting away from that heavy stuff of 1970 and 71. And so the sounds were getting a little more musical, a little more accessibility to them. And Headstone is a great example of that. But in Headstone's case, they totally succeed at what they do. Really excellent guitar textures. The songs are really memorable. The singers really good. Really nice, concise, intelligent arrangements. A lot of variety, a lot of dynamics. So let's get into the band a little bit. You've got Mark Ashton, who was originally the drummer for Rare Bird, but in this band he's the guitar player and vocalist. So kudos to him for making that transition. And then we have Peter Van Hook on drums, who's a known session drummer at the time. Steve Bolton on guitar, who used to be in Atomic Rooster, later version of Atomic Rooster. And then later on they ended up with a bass player named Phil Chen, and then they also ended up with another bass player named Jerome Renison on bass, and he actually ended up in Automatic Man in 1977. So that was really interesting to find out. And so obviously the funkiness that he exhibits with Headstone on their second album really transferred well to what Automatic Man was doing. And then briefly as well, Chili Charles was on drums. So there was a slight lineup shift between the first and second album. So they got signed to EMI in Europe, and then they got signed by ABC in the U.S. And so the Bad Habits album came out in 1974, and then an album called Headstone in 1975. And you kind of need to collect the different versions if you're a hardcore collector and completist like me. Bad Habits came out in the UK with a nun smoking a cigarette, but it came out in the US with more of an artsy sort of cover with no pictures or anything controversial. And then there's actually even a third version, I think, that maybe came out of France that shows a nun in stockings and garters smoking a cigarette. So there's three variations of that album. And then the second album, Headstone, has a really nice cover, white with a kind of a metallic metal bird sort of motif that's really interesting. It turns out it's a Hypnosis cover. Of course, it did a lot of famous covers for 70s bands back in the day. But it's another one of those bands where I'm not really going to go through them song by song. I will say that Bad Habits is a really solid record. As I mentioned before, great two guitar work, really tight, funky rhythm section, really nice vocals, and pretty good songs. They're kind of second tier songs, somewhat on the first album, but they potentially could have been a first tier band because they're really pretty solid for a lot of these obscure bands I talk about. But then they get to the second album, Headstone, just called Headstone from 1975, and it's got a lot more variety and a lot wider dynamic range. It gets a little funkier even, but they really pull it off. And I find that the second album is a lot stronger and a lot closer to being a first tier band. They really could have broke out with that second album, but of course being on ABC in the US, it's not going to get that much promotion or support. I don't really know if they ever toured the US, and I have to imagine they were a pretty great live band because the musicianship is top notch, and everything's really there, and the arrangements are really nice too, with real economical arrangements to them, but really smart, really intelligent, and nice harmony vocals too. I know a lot of my regular viewers know that I talk about harmony vocals a lot. I really like a lot of the bands from the 60s and 70s that had a lot more harmony vocals than what we got moving forward a lot of times. A lot of bands really valued having that in their music back then. But that second album, Headstone, is killer. I would almost say the second album is definitely a first tier band. Um, Probably about 95%, only 5% away from actual greatness. And oh, I forgot to mention that they also had a violin player, and I forget to mention that because even though they have a full-time violin player in their band, a lot of times his violin work is really integrated, so you're not really thinking about hearing a violin. And then other times the violin is more predominant and really stands out. And Joe O'Donnell, excellent violin player, and he has a really nice pedigree too. He used to be in East of Eden, which had several albums out back in the early 70s and featured his violin a lot. But he was also in a band called Mushroom and another band called Riff Raff. And so I may end up doing videos on all three of those bands because they're all very interesting. So he had quite a pedigree, but nice for all these guys to move away from some of these prog bands and some of these more somewhat experimental bands and move into a direction like Headstone, where it's great classic British rock with a lot of variety, a lot of dynamics, a little bit of funkiness, and just kind of a hint of prog elements in them with the keyboard work and things like that. So I like them a lot. They're another one of those obscure bands that um, really flirts between being a second and first tier band and just have all the right elements. And it's just a great listen. It just feels good listening to both their albums, particularly the second one. So anyway, Headstone. It's nice that they're getting a little more attention now, and their albums are out on CD, and maybe at some point something live might get issued. I definitely would like to hear that because they definitely must have sounded great live, and it would be really nice to hear them totally stripped down with a little more energy. But that said, cool band. Links below. Check them out. Highly recommended.